In December 1985, a routine pizza delivery became the opening act of one of the most chilling revenge sprees in American true crime history. Mitchell Sims, a former Domino's manager with a grudge against his former employer, launched a cross-country killing spree targeting the very employees who wore the uniform he once wore. Picture a slow, quiet suburban street at dusk. This is Hanahan, South Carolina, December 3rd, 1985. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in the small Navy town. The evening routine was in motion. Families were sitting down for dinner, the smell of pine trees mixed with the cool December air. At the local Domino's Pizza, the night shift was like any other. Two young Navy men, Melke and Christopher Zerr, both 24 years old, were working a part-time gig to supplement their military pay. They were roommates, friends, and shipmates. They were also the perfect targets for our story's killer. At 7:20 p.m., the phone rang on the wall next to an old Domino's uniform that had been left hanging there for some time. A man's voice placed an order for delivery to a modest house on Christine Drive. This would be a typical, routine short trip, so Gary grabbed the pizzas and headed out the door. But Gary never came back. Within minutes, the Domino's store received a frantic call. It was Gary. His voice was weak as he strained to speak. He managed to utter a few chilling words. "I've been shot. Mitchell Sims did it." Then the line went dead. Gary Melke, despite being mortally wounded, had done the unthinkable. He had gotten behind the wheel of his car and driven himself to a police station. He collapsed in the parking lot, dying shortly after officers reached him. He had just enough strength left to name his killer. But the terror wasn't over. When police arrived at the house on Christine Drive, they found the scene of a massacre. Inside, they discovered the body of Christopher Zerr. He had also been shot. Two young men, just trying to make a few extra dollars, were both dead and dying. And the name they left behind, Mitchell Sims, was about to become the subject of one of the most bizarre and brutal revenge sprees in American crime history. To understand the murders, you have to understand the man. Mitchell Carlton Sims was a former Domino's manager. He knew the system inside and out, the delivery routes, the cash drops, the vulnerabilities. Sims had a chip on his shoulder the size of a pizza box. He'd recently had a major falling out with his supervisor at Domino's. What started as a workplace dispute festered into an obsession. By the fall of 1985, Mitchell Sims had declared war on the company that he felt had wronged him. And his weapon of choice was the very thing Domino's relied on, its employees. He didn't act alone. Alongside him was his girlfriend, Ruby Paget, a woman who seemed willing to follow him into the abyss. Together they went on the run, transforming a corporate grievance into a cross-country killing spree. But the murders in South Carolina were just the opening act. Sims and Paget didn't go to ground. Instead, they did something brazen. They drove across the country, 2,500 miles from the swamps of South Carolina to the sunshine of Southern California. They weren't fleeing, they were hunting. They arrived in sunny Southern California on December 9, 1985. Just 6 days after the South Carolina murders, the couple checked into a motel in Glendale, California, a suburb of Los Angeles. They were far from home in a city where no one knew their faces. They picked up the phone and ordered a pizza. The driver who drew the short straw was John Harrigan. He was 21 years old, a young man just trying to earn a living. He arrived at the motel room with the order, expecting a simple transaction. Instead, he was ambushed. Sims and Paget dragged the young man inside. This wasn't just a robbery or a quick killing. It was a systematic, brutal torture. They held him captive in that motel room, and in a depravity that is almost impossible to comprehend, they tied him up and placed a plastic laundry bag over his head and drowned him in the bathtub full of warm water. They had killed a third Domino's employee, but for Mitchell Sims, the night was still young. After murdering John Harrigan, Sims committed an act of chilling theatrics. He stripped off Harrigan's clothes and put on the dead man's uniform. He grabbed a length of rope, then he drove to the local Domino's store where Harrigan had worked. It was near closing time. The lights were out and the Domino's sign was unlit. The store was quiet, with only 2 employees left, Paul Diaz and Rene Farias. They saw a man in a Domino's uniform walk in. It was their colleague's uniform. They had no reason to be suspicious. But the man was not John Harrigan. It was Mitchell Sims. Sims pulled out a gun. He forced Diaz and Farias to the back of the store. Using the rope he'd brought, he tied them up. Then he did something so evil it defies logic. He made nooses, placed them around the necks of the 2 terrified young men, and hung them from the walk-in freezer handles. He left them there to die. For nearly an hour, Paul Diaz and Rene Farias fought for their lives, standing on their tiptoes on cardboard boxes in the freezing cold, choking against the rope. They survived only because an off-duty employee happened to come back to the store and found them. Diaz suffered permanent nerve damage in his hands, and Farias bore the psychological scars forever. They were the lucky ones. Before Sims and Paget could further their campaign, it was over. The combined manhunt across 2 states eventually led to the arrest of Mitchell Sims and Ruby Paget. The case against Sims was overwhelming. Gary Melke's final statement that it was Mitchell Sims who had shot him constituted a dying declaration. The South Carolina prosecutor would have no problem using it. Further, the physical evidence that was found with Harrigan's body in the motel room and the testimony of both survivors, Diaz and Farias, destroyed any possibility that Sims would get away with his crimes. At trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a man driven by cold, calculated revenge against a corporation, using innocent teenagers and young men as pawns in his twisted vendetta. Ruby Paget cooperated with prosecutors, turning state's evidence against her lover to save herself. She testified about the cross-country journey, the motel room torture, and the coldness of Sims' actions. Mitchell Sims was convicted of murder and sentenced to death in California. As of this recording, he remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison, one of the longest-serving inmates in California's death row. He has spent decades appealing his sentence, trying to escape the ultimate price for his crimes. The Domino's Corporation, meanwhile, changed its policies. They implemented stricter cash limits for drivers, enhanced safety protocols, and the murder of delivery drivers became a central focus of their security measures, a tragic legacy born from the actions of one of their own. The story of Mitchell Sims is a chilling reminder that monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they wear familiar uniforms. Sometimes they hide in plain sight and nurse a grudge. For Gary Melke, Christopher Zerr, and John Harrigan, a simple delivery turned into a death sentence. For Paul Diaz and Rene Farias, it was a night of unimaginable horror that they somehow survived. Sims' motive? a corporate dispute. This makes his case unique in the annals of true crime. It wasn't about money, sex, or impulse. It was about revenge, pure, methodical, and unrelenting. The question that lingers isn't just how he did it, but why Domino's? Why did a manager's dispute escalate into a cross-country killing spree? The answer perhaps lies in the mind of a man who decided that the ultimate delivery was not pizza, but death. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please like and subscribe for more stories from the dark side of history. And as always, stay safe out there. This has been Infamous Histories TV.